Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson. We've got another great one for you this week. LP Hernandez is going to be here. We're going to talk about his books like In the Valley of the Headless Men and No Gods, Only Chaos, and we're going to talk about the sci-fi horror classic Event Horizon. It's a really great chat. Before we get to that, though, I want to tell you about a book that I just finished reading. I wrote a review for Book Page, which will go up at some point, I think in May, maybe June. It's called The Starving Saints. It's by Caitlin Starling. It comes out in late May, I believe. It is a fantasy horror novel set in a castle under siege. It follows three women from very different walks of life who are all living under these siege conditions, all tied to the fate of the castle in one way or another. Everyone is starving, everyone is desperate, and all of a sudden, these four magical beings appear in the middle of the castle, claiming to be the deities that this culture worships and reveres, and they bring food with them. But I don't want to say any more than that, I don't think, because it gets dark and strange very quickly. It's a wonderful blend of the kind of grimdark fantasy aesthetic that you might like if you love George R. R. Martin or Joe Abercrombie or writers like that, and a very particular, very rich, luscious blend of cosmic horror and cannibal horror and things like that. I absolutely loved it. I'm definitely going to try to get Caitlin Starling on the show because I loved it so much. That is my recommendation this week. Go find The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. Pre-order that thing. You're going to want to read it. That's enough of me rambling. Let's head over to our interview with LP Hernandez. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is a Texas author who I was lucky enough to meet at Ghoulish Book Fest, one of the rising stars of horror fiction right now. He is the co-founder and co-publisher of Sobelo Books. He is the author of two absolute bangers that came out last year, the story collection No Gods, Only Chaos, and the novella In the Valley of the Headless Men. LP Hernandez, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm not sure if this is a good movie anymore.
Really? Okay. We will see what happens when we get to that. But before we talk about Event Horizon, I want to talk to you about In the Valley of the Headless Men specifically. I read No Gods Only Chaos last year. I read In the Valley of the Headless Men, or finished it, I should say, this week. And that is a really incredible piece of work. For anyone who doesn't know, it's available from Cemetery Gates. Is that right?
Yes, that one is.
Yeah. Okay. So for anyone who doesn't know, could you give us kind of a little teaser of what In the Valley of the Headless Men is?
I'm pretty well practiced at this coming off of Ghoulish Book Fest when I had to sell it to customers. So it's about two estranged brothers, Joseph and Oscar, who have different fathers. They reunite following the death of their mother. And at this time, they're both kind of around middle age. There's a little bit of age difference between them. Um, as they're going through her things, Oscar, the brother kind of off, I guess the brother that is not the main focus, um, finds some letters from Joseph's father in a desk, and those kind of are upsetting to him until he gets to the last one, which has kind of a different feel than all the other ones. It mentions this place called the Nahanni Valley, basically suggesting that his dad went there to find himself. And so the brothers, prompted by Oscar, decide somewhat on a whim as part of their reconnecting journey to go to the same place, the Nahanni Valley, which is a real park in Canada. It has another name. It is also known as the Valley of the Headless Men because there is a legacy of fur trappers, of treasure hunters going to the park and then not returning, it being their bodies being discovered later without the heads. So In the wilderness, there aren't many animals that would just leave a perfectly good corpse and take the head. That's kind of like something you would do if you're taking a prize. So that's led to a lot of speculation about what could be up there. There were some native people who lived there called the Dene. I've never heard it actually pronounced. I hope that's how it's pronounced. Who have stories in their history about giants. They said they were chased away by giants. So Oscar Joseph and Joseph's kind of tag along would have been wife at a certain point in his life all go to the Nahanni Valley, where all the weirdness they'd read about online begins to manifest for themselves.
Yeah, it's a wonderful novella length exploration of this very weird valley that's also wrapped up in some amazing character work, great like explorations of grief and loss and what your life maybe could have been if the fork in the road had led you a different way at various points. Um, how did it start for you? I know because, like you said, that the Nahanni Valley is real, and if you look around online, you can find these legends, various versions of what goes on in this valley. Was it the valley first that sort of drew you to this story? Was it the character angle? How did it start?
So I've tried to write this story quite a few times. Actually, funny on I shared this on Blue Sky a couple weeks ago. So this has been a short story and a long short story, like almost 8,000 words. That version was produced by the No Sleep podcast. In that version, they're all like college kids. Um, this has been novelette length. And then years ago, I participated in Pit Dark. Um, and I'd never had a bite before. And I had an idea to turn In the Valley of the Headless Man into a novel. And I got one like by an agent. And so I I wrote a novel in like 3 weeks, kind of stringing her along through email. So it was all I did for about 3 weeks and sent it to her, and I never heard from her. And then the other day, I was, I think I was going back through emails between me and Becky Lejeune, looking for something I had sent her maybe months ago, and found that the very first email I sent her was that story. Like my agent now is the agent I had contacted years ago with a horrifically written in 3 weeks novel version of the same story. That one had the same characters, and that's what made it not work, other than it was written in 3 weeks and she got a rough draft. Sorry, Becky, if you're listening. Um, what did change over time was the characters. I don't feel like I ever connected to the story, but I love the setting. It kind of feels like one of those untouched places, which is someone that grew up, wanting to dig up dinosaur bones and has been fascinated by like out of place artifacts. I definitely came to the legend first and really just kind of whiffed multiple times at the story. And then I kind of so those two characters are basically representations of me and my brother. We have different dads. And Oscar, like the struggles that are hinted at, is somewhat of an allegory for my brother's struggles with dyslexia. So being able to basically write myself and my brother into a story, everything just clicked. So it made a whole lot more sense when I did it that way.
So, have you ever been near or in the Nahanni Valley, or is it just something that you read about and became fascinated by?
It is very hard to get to. I
Yeah.
did do some research. Not a cheap trick. Almost said cheap trick. Not a cheap trip at all. So the closest I've been is British Columbia. My wife and I had a baby moon there a long time ago when we were fantasizing about moving to Canada. That's looking like a much more appealing option at this moment. I
Yeah.
went to this very, very small kind of region of interconnected towns called Bella Coola. And I imagine there's probably some similarities, but they're on the map. I would guess they're still 1,000 miles apart, but it is a valley surrounded by mountains. So when you step off the plane, you're immediately looking up. So not quite the same. These are the coastal mountains of British Columbia. Not quite the same diversity of wildlife and kind of the unique setting, like waterfalls and stuff like that. I want to. I don't know. I don't know if it's in the cards for me. I'll just live through Google Earth.
Listen, if someone goes and makes a movie out of In the Valley of the Headless Men, you can fund Les's trip to the Valley of the Headless Men, and maybe there'll be a memoir in there or something. You mentioned the No Sleep podcast, and I know you've contributed a lot to that. Uh, I am fascinated by the sort of rise in horror fiction podcast, as in podcasts that adapt horror fiction into dramatic readings. I think it's a wonderful outlet. As someone who has had their stories translated in that way multiple times now, like what does it give you as a creator to have that experience?
The first time was, I mean, it was a milestone for me because I've been at that point listening to the podcast for several years. It was kind of at the point in my Air Force career where I was able to not focus 100% on the Air Force because I've been in school quite a lot. So being able to do a little, a little more concentrated on the writing. The very first story I had on was called Good Strawberries, and it was on the pay side. I remember I was part of the Facebook group, and I would see, some of the legendary stories for that podcast, the Pancake Family, Baraska. There's, let's see, Whitefall. There's, a handful, maybe a dozen that get brought up over and over. And I was like, I'm gonna be a celebrity. Like this one story. I was like just waiting. I was on Facebook just hitting refresh all day. And because it was on the pay side, a lot fewer people heard it, and no one really said anything about it. But just to get the acceptance, my wife and I, like when that email came through, we were living in Alabama at the time, and we were dancing in the kitchen. I went on a bit of a dry spell with no sleep after that, but kind of I'd have like one or two stories every season until season 16. I kind of feel like um, that was, if people know me, it's for that season. I had several on there that people seem to enjoy. Not in the Valley of the Headless Man. That was also on the pay side, and I've only ever heard a few people comment on it. I guess what it gives me is you hear these characters in kind of your own voice in your head. So to hear it acted with soundscape and Brandon Boone's wonderful music, which it's different for every single story. It makes you forget that you're the person that wrote it. I think I would say my honest experience, especially with a little bit of distance between you and the story, depending on how long it takes for them to adapt it. It could be 9 months, a year, 2 years. So I might have forgotten a lot of elements of it, and to hear it kind of brought to life with voice acting is like almost a detached sort of feeling. So it's wonderful. I still get just as excited now. I don't dance anymore, but I still get excited when I get that acceptance.
Yeah, it's a great outlet for storytellers, and it's wonderful that it's caught on in the way that it has. Um, because we're talking about short stories, I have to talk about when I first discovered your work. It was, I think, Neil McRobert from Talking Scared had mentioned enjoying No Gods Only Chaos, and I was like, great title. Okay, I'm gonna give this a shot, and picked it up, and the first story is about this weirdo who lives in a little shack and takes care of a cemetery, and these kids are sort of daring each other to go see what's in his shack, and they find something that just made me like, I could have stood up and given you a round of applause for that story. I was having such a good time, and it was immediately like, okay, I can rock with this guy. Like whatever he has going on, I'm gonna check out. Um, what was the experience of putting, I know you've put out other collections prior to No Gods Only Chaos, but it is kind of a breakthrough one for you, at least in my mind. Uh, what was the experience of putting that collection together, and what were you kind of going for in the overall effect? I hear a lot of authors compare building a collection to sort of putting an album together if you're a band. So what was it like for you?
Um, so I really wanted to, in all of my collections, well, there's one version of my first collection that no longer quite represents my vision, but I'll just be quiet about that. The second one, all of the Rat King, all of the drawings were commissioned. So I worked with an artist and we would go back and forth on it. Eh, so for No Gods, this was my attempt to um, basically to land with a decent publisher. So I got the cover art. Christina from Trueborn Press, she put it together with my idea, but she was wonderful. Got the formatting done, um, and curated my own stuff. I guess, like you said, comparing it to an album, um, I think my intent was to show the diversity of story. What I hear as a common complaint when people read single author collections is they're hitting the same note. It's not a huge tonal difference from story one to story three. So, although there are a couple of overlapping themes, there's two sort of detached serial killers, but they kind of almost bookend the collection. And even though there is an element of humor, the approach and the I would say even the tone is a bit different in both of them. So my intent was to put together a basically done book, financed completely by myself, and hand it to a publisher. And that did work initially. And I think people know the story of everything that happened after that. If you were on Twitter at the time, Cemetery Dance to Darklit, which led me to launching my own press with LC Marino, which is where the store or the collection resides now.
So this is a good segue into talking about Sobelo Books, which we're recording this on March 21st. On March 25th, y'all are releasing your next book. It's called Empty Devils by Chris DeLeo. Other than we just talked about the motivating factor in starting up that press. What has being a publisher and being able to curate not just like a release calendar, but to work with authors on that level added to your own fiction output, do you think?
It has severely limited my fiction output.
Oh gosh.
No, I would say there's a lot of validating things about it. And as you and I were talking before we hit record, I am retiring from the Air Force in the not too distant future. So I think if anything, this is broadening a certain skill set, which I've always been proud of, which is my editing. I edit. I wouldn't say it's an unusual fashion. I think I actually heard Stephen King does it the exact same way. This may be old information. Maybe he does it differently now, where he goes back when he's returning to a story. He'll go back and edit the last 3 pages he wrote, or something like that. So you're continually rereading and editing your own work. So I've always been pretty confident in my editing. But to get some feedback from the authors that we've worked with, Rob Atone being one, and Chris as well, that I'm a pretty rigorous editor. Um, that was validating. I'd say I hope I hope you do bring Chris on, and I hope he'll say the same thing. Yeah, it was a lot of the most. I wouldn't say it's a shocking thing, but how someone else's crutches. I don't want to say as a bad word. Tendencies maybe is a better word to use, ellipses and em dashes and various certain words that'll pop up. You definitely see it in someone else's work a lot. It's glaring compared to your own work. Lucas or LC, my the co-owner of Sobelo with me, I sent him a novel that we're shopping right now, and he had, I think, 140 edits, and a lot of them were the same ellipses and em dashes that I had called other people out for. And so uh, it's rewarding in that way. I think it, it'll make me a better writer over time because I'm hyper aware of it now.
You mentioned Stephen King, and one thing that I picked up from Stephen King that I've had fiction and nonfiction editors mention to me before is that I use italics too much to
Mm.
emphasize phrasing, and I've had editors, especially in the journalism world, go like, if you can't make a point without just like typing out the words, then you need to rephrase how you make the point. You don't have to do the italics, and it is so a part of my like DNA in terms of learning how to write, especially how to write horror because of Stephen King, that it's really hard for me to shake, and it's always interesting to see it pointed out. Um, since we're talking about Chris and Empty Devils, I don't actually know much about this book. So since it's about to hit stores, what what is Empty Devils? What can readers get from that?
So this is I would say it's the second original that we accepted. It'll be the first that we've published. Catherine McCarthy's will be coming out in May. Um, Death of a Clown. So this one, Lucas and I were kind of tag teaming, the submissions as they came in, and I remember how excited he was when he this one came in. So it is about a father who it's inspired by, I don't want to say her last name wrong, but Heather, it's either Hayer or Hire, I can't remember. But she's the young woman who was killed in Charlottesville that was run down by the vehicle back when those, the Nazi stuff was happening. So it's basically a father that's been placed in a very similar scenario. And it starts off with this father going to confront these white supremacists about his, recently, like the funeral hasn't even happened yet. And so it is very heavy on grief. The daughter appears often um, as either his thoughts or a ghost, or, it could be either one, kind of depending on how you want your reading experience to be. So his journey through grief, through rage, honestly, not being able to let it go, and then finding some things out about his daughter that, you know, I guess it's natural that when someone passes unexpectedly, you start to explore their space a little bit. So he does find some things that maybe he'd forgotten about, and maybe he um, were just tucked a little further back in his memories until he needed them for this part of his life. So while he's grieving at her grave, something that she was connected to as a child comes back. And that has a big part of the story that happens with these awful, awful Nazis.
We could all use horror stories about taking it to Nazis and white supremacists right now, I think. So that is, again, everybody, March 25th. So if you're listening to this, it will be out. So go pick it up. I'm going to pick it up. And I think that that is a good point to transition over to our chosen story, which Les brought. The classic. It depends on who you ask. I would say classic at this point. It is one of those horror films that has had the sort of critical reappraisal in recent years. 1997's film Event Horizon, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson and starring Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, Kathleen Quinlan, Jolie Richardson. Les,
Yes.
what was your first experience with Event Horizon, and why did you pick it as the story to bring to us?
I definitely didn't see it in theaters. In 1997, I would have been 14. So it would have been a bit taboo for me to see a rated R movie at that time. I wasn't too far off from doing it. Um, so it was more than likely a video rental. So either Family Video or Blockbuster, whenever we had a local one that just, I don't remember the name. Probably my brother's choice, and one that he regretted because he's a scaredy cat when it comes to films. So I definitely have some very early memories that um, I think it planted a lot of seeds that I've carried with me. It's in kind of that 4 or 5 year space of some movies that I think critically could be, it's not so hot on the tomato meter. This one, Dark City, which I love, and Equilibrium. Those were a few that were kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s that I just watched repeatedly, and I couldn't tell you what it was about. Well, for Event Horizon, I can, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but it's a lot of the questions that it kind of asks and somewhat answers, but doesn't answer at times.
So speaking of that, like let's talk a little bit. Let's talk about the brass tacks of the plot here. What how would you, if someone hasn't seen Event Horizon and you're pitching it to them as like, hey, let's throw this movie on tonight. What is Event Horizon?
Haunted house movie in space, I think.
Yes.
But for some plot details, And I think just connecting it back to my own work, it was probably in several places, but most obviously in the Valley of the Headless Man, which we can talk about, the Chaos Engine, and the Return of the Champion in my collection, where astronauts come back and they've been basically replaced. So the same idea that they went off somewhere and came back different. So in this movie, we have Sam Neill's character Weir, who designed this machine to travel to the far reaches of space, which he explains in a scientific way that I've seen duplicated many times, where he folds a piece of paper and he's like, "Oh, we just fold space, super easy." Um, so he does that. The ship Event Horizon is the name of the ship, and it is gone for several years out around Neptune-ish, and then 7 years, I believe, per the plot, it shows back up, and it's sending kind of like a distress signal. So Lawrence Fishburne and basically everybody in the movie, other than Sam Neill, are part of a rescue crew to go investigate. Um, so we have a very quick introduction. Let's kind of like we can't even talk about what we're doing. We got to get in these crazy chambers, not grow facial hair for the next 55 days, and then we're going to show up in Neptune's orbit, although technically it's not in the orbit, it's actually in the clouds. So, sorry, that's a little too in the weeds on that one. So they reach the event horizon, and it is basically a haunted house in space from there.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those films that is part of the Alien lineage
Mm.
in terms of the vibe. Um, I've heard it described many times, and it's especially interesting given what In the Valley of the Headless Man is about. It's interesting that you did not go for the simpler explanation, which I hear all the time of like, oh, Event Horizon is a movie about an experimental spaceship that has this faster than light drive that opens a portal to hell. And like that's how it's referred to in the movie, but it's much more like someone says hell. It's I believe Jason
Mhm.
Isaac's character because but really what's going on is like that's sort of the closest thing they have in terms of describing what they've experienced or what they might experience. It's much more cosmic and unknowable than that in actual practice, which is something that I had sort of forgotten about and found really interesting. I also just love that the Event Horizon is a spaceship that was built as part of a top secret government program to invent faster than light travel through this engine that Weir has designed. So it's just supposed to be like a spaceship. Just astronauts go in this spaceship and they venture out. But the moment they step on this ship, it's the creepiest ship that anyone has ever built. And I was joking about this on Blue Sky last night while I was rewatching it. It's so funny that he built a haunted house for space before it became haunted. I love that the movie just goes for it in that term in those terms in terms of the design and the lengths to which it's able to stretch that sort of cosmic weirdness. Um, why do you think it stuck with you? I mean, you mentioned watching it a lot. So why do you think it stuck with you to the point that themes in it and sort of plot devices in it have all these echoes in your work?
I'm sure initially, that might have been the most violent or the most shocking imagery I'd seen at that time. I don't know if, we I've made it to like Cannibal Holocaust or anything by that point. So especially the scene where I believe was it Smith maybe gets like eviscerated in a very it's he gets cut open and hung up and his entrails emptied in the time it takes Lawrence Fishburne to like run down 3 hallways. So it's very quick. But there is some pretty shot. I probably paused it on that imagery and it was just fascinated. I may not have seen anything like that before. And that is kind of the glimpses of hell. It is the the video, which I think even now is still really effective, of the previous crew, even though according to IMDb, the Latin was wrong and it should have actually been said another way. But that was very effective for me then. The seed that never left me was that giant you know, that mechanism which was responsible for the faster than light travel, but definitely had a lot of other stuff going on with it that went somewhere unknown. Although they give you a lot of glimpses of what that unknown could be, and I think I could take or leave it for those. I like the unknown part a little bit better. So I understand there's a like a 130-minute version of this movie out there somewhere. Rumors are it's on someone like it's on VHS. I feel like this is one of those movies, and there are a few from the 90s and the early 2000s that producers or somebody had their hands in. You could feel like it's not the director's complete vision. I'm going back to Dark City because that is one of my favorite. I just I don't know why, but I love it, and how I, the opening to Dark City is explaining the biggest plot twist in the entire movie. They give you in the opening credits because they didn't think audiences would be smart enough or patient enough to figure it out. This feels like another one of those movies where the director had a vision and stuff got moved around.
Right. It goes, I mean, it goes back to like Blade Runner too.
Hmm.
The voiceover in the theatrical cut of Blade Runner that they made Harrison Ford do, where Harrison Ford sounds like the most bored man alive, having to do this sort of fake hard-boiled detective
Mm.
dialogue because they thought people wouldn't understand Blade Runner. Yeah, there's a whole section of like lost footage from this film that every once in a while it gets whispered about, like, oh, someone has it somewhere, or it was, yeah, it was on a VHS tape, or someone made a copy, or, and from what I understand, most of the missing footage is the quote unquote hell stuff. It's
Hmm.
all the really gruesome stuff that we see long glimpses, but glimpses of in the movie that was supposed to be expanded out and be grosser. But and like I look, I love a gory movie as much as anybody, and there are definitely visuals in this movie of that are very gruesome that are also that stick with me. But like I'm like you, I think that watching that drive, that sort of gyroscopic
Hmm.
mechanism moving with the lights behind it, is the creepiest part of this movie. And even when I think about my favorite like death scenes in the movie, my actual favorite death scene is the one where Peters dies. Peters is Kathleen Quinlan's character,
Hmm.
and all her death is the least gruesome death. She falls,
Hmm.
but the way that it is filmed, she falls and basically suffers massive internal hemorrhaging, and like blood comes up, and then that blood pools in the water, like the coolant and stuff
Hmm.
around the engine, so it's red for the rest of the movie.
Hmm.
That's amazing. That's such a great creepy touch. And it's so much more interesting. Not that there's anything wrong with the gore, but it's so much more interesting to kind of contemplate it as like, okay, so if you fold, it's like the Jaunt, like Stephen King's The Jaunt, where
Hmm.
if you do this the wrong way, what happens to you? What happens to your mind?
Hmm.
What happens to your soul? So you mentioned at the top of this recording that you're not sure this is a good movie. How long had it been since you revisited it?
So, I remember this came out, I believe it was last year on ultra high def. And there's a few movies that, I'm trying to pull away from all digital, so I'll buy the ones I care about.
Yeah.
And so I remember like waiting 3 or 4 months to be able to buy this. And I bought it thinking I was around probably I was not too far off from that age when I watched it. So maybe my daughter, who's turning 13, might enjoy it. I could skip some of the, really awful parts. We love some rated R movies like Tombstone. We watched together. So I was like, kind of watching it for her, like with her in mind. So we started it and did not get very far into it. So I had not watched the ultra high def version. meaning I probably haven't seen this for 5 or 6 years, but I watched it so much when I was young that there were a few gaps in my memory. I felt like this was watching it this week. I was like, was this intended to be a 3D movie? Because there's so many images of like the beginning is like the stuff kind of floating in space. There's a lot of blood that comes directly at the camera.
Right, right.
A lot of sparks for some reason. I didn't write it down, but I was thinking, especially kind of in the later scenes where Sam Neill has become the Incredible Hulk and he's throwing people around the room. Like there's a lot of sparks for some reason, like more than there should be. Um, but it was kind of like, oh, that's a little bit silly. Like this definitely felt like you said, Alien. There was a time when I guess America assumed that space travel would be done by average Joes because even the pilots, like uh, he's smoking, he's got tattoos, whatever. I have tattoos, I don't smoke, but they kind of present them as at least intellectually well below Sam Neill's character because of course he has to explain his his creation to them and they get lost immediately. So I love that about it. I love a ragtag group of whomever. The posters on the wall. I was like, I forgot that. But yeah,
Yeah,
there's like, pinup girls on the wall. Like, so this is the most top secret, biggest expedition to explore faster than light travel, and they pick the next guys up, I guess, to go rescue them or to go, investigate this ship at the very least. So, but yeah, I think a critical, like watching this, knowing we're going to have this interview, there's a lot. I was like, why did I never wonder about that? Like how long it could take to eviscerate a body and then hang it up by hooks. It's as long as it takes Lawrence Fishburne to run across a ship, which is apparently very fast.
yeah. Lawrence Fishburne, fastest man alive. Um, it's definitely got that like choppy. It was one of those films that famously was sort of played with by like there was a shorter production schedule.
Mm,
It was one of those movies that had to hit its release date,
sure.
and it didn't come together as well as it could have. And there are certainly some of it is I think it has that Jurassic Park syndrome of, I mean, speaking of Sam Neill,
Hmm.
where 90 there were a lot of 90s action movies that came out in the wake of Jurassic Park that were about, science gone wrong or something like that, where you had to have the character who would explain everything to you
Mm,
and who was by necessity kind of a jerk about it. And some of them work better than others. And I think with this one, I like the arguments. I like it reminds me of Aliens actually a
mm,
little bit. The sort of like you have the expert and then you have the space truckers who are just like, come on,
hmm.
just tell us what we need to know so we can do our jobs. I like that push pull, but I do think that the movie occasionally gets a little too in the weeds on that. And then you have the CGI that, like you said, there's a whole the opening shot of the movie is
It's an
or one
Omega watch, I
yeah,
think.
there's a watch, there's like a cup that
Hmm.
floats, a bottle of water floats by, and it's a dream sequence, but it's still just like, look at what we can do with our computers now. We can make this float. Um, so yeah, it's kind of a mess. I still find it a very endearing mess, but my experience with this movie is much more. I do wonder what it would have been like to watch it as a teenager because I didn't watch it until I was maybe 30. Honestly,
Mm, wow.
I think it was one of those things because I feel like we talk about this every week on the show, but wasn't allowed to watch horror movies as a kid,
Hmm.
so I played a lot of catch up. Um, and there was a period in my life when I lived alone before I met my wife, and I would sort of devote like every night was homework. I would go home and look what was on streaming that I could easily reach that was a horror movie I hadn't seen. And at one point I went, "Oh, Event Horizon. Okay, I've heard so much about this movie. I got to watch it." And I liked it, and I still like it, and I think that it is a diamond in the rough in terms of what it can convey, but I don't have the same affection for it as some of my friends who saw it either, in 97 or like on DVD a few years later when they were like in high school and could really go, "Oh man, this movie where the guy's eyes explode, it's so great." Um, it also probably didn't help that I was like I went through that phase where in my like early 20s where I was watching all the most extreme things I could find, and
Yeah.
it sort of numbs you at a certain point. But I want to go back to the idea of the chaos engine, because
Okay.
in the Valley of the Headless Men, you have this. I don't want to spoil the book too much for anyone who hasn't read it, because it's out there now. You can go buy it. It's great. You have this idea that there is a force at work that can alter perception, alter the world in ways that have to do with chaos and probability and things like that. And you just mentioned it's in more than one of your stories. It's a sort of a classic cosmic horror idea, but why do you think it appeals to you so much?
I think it's, what I guess, critique now about, I'll caveat. I still love Event Horizon, even after having watched it for the first time in a few years and noticing some of its flaws. Like you said, a diamond in the rough. And if you're just looking to enjoy a horror movie without being too critical about some logic and, how many sparks there should be in any scene, it's still a very enjoyable movie. So, I think what it's the it's the possibility more than kind of what Event Horizon shows you that stuck with me, and it's always been the idea of bringing things through. Um, so, there's definitely a story element, kind of like in I feel after having watched this again that the event horizon, or that the engine, the mechanism that Sam Neill built from day one, it was calling to him. It was calling to the crew very specifically because of all the trauma that gets kind of unpacked during, it has a lot of things that can kind of pick apart. These are very vulnerable people that show up. Of all the people that, I don't know, we're not really introduced to the world like, is this the only, or is this one of many? But it's these people that show up. And so my chaos engine in the Valley of the Headless Men is aware of the people that are inside the park the whole time. And it is doing just enough to kind of shepherd and guide them because it has a function to perform. I would say it's the hell and evil kind of get tossed around a little bit in Event Horizon, but I it's more I would say it's more neutral than that. The Chaos Engine has a function, and I would say to perform its function, it needs to draw things to it, living beings to it. So how it works, that's the wonderful part about Cosmic is you don't really have to explain it. It just does. Um, and I think that's why, even though, like I said, I probably paused it on some of those gory scenes, I maybe even tried to sketch a few of them. I didn't super need it. Like it was we went somewhere else and came back, or it can bring you somewhere else. That seed has stuck with me, and it's probably shown up in other places in my work, but most obviously in the Valley of the Headless Men.
So I know that we just got done talking about how that element is more appealing than the gore or the weird body horror stuff that happens.
Mhm.
But watching this movie, and then while reading In the Valley of the Headless Men, while finishing that book, and then thinking about the story Cemetery Joe, which opens No Gods Only Chaos. There's a character in the Valley of the Headless Men named Sam,
Mhm.
who is one of the creepiest beings I have encountered in a while, in part because from the moment you meet Sam in the book, and I don't think this is a huge spoiler, but from the moment you meet Sam, it's very clear that his body is deteriorating in some way. And why that is better left to read the book and find out. But you have Cemetery Joe, this story of this guy who can, and again, like you just mentioned, for reasons that are never fully explained, has this gift of
Mhm.
manipulating the dead in lots of different kooky ways that he decides to do. And then in Event Horizon, you have the way that this energy, whatever it is that's coming out of this engine, expresses itself is very often through mutilation
Mhm.
and desecration of a human form. Uh, this might be way too myopic to ask a horror writer, but I'm curious if like the whole messing with bodies and picking them apart in the way that you do, did that come from Event Horizon or did that come from some other horror story, or is that just a naturally occurring thing in your imagination?
So, for In the Valley, Sam has appeared in every iteration of it. Um, the other characters have changed. It's been several more people. I think the first one there were 4 or 5 college kids, and then in the version you had there were 3 adults. Um, but Sam was there even in that version, and it was kind of my relationship to him that changed what he was over the various iterations of In the Valley of the Headless Men. I wouldn't say it's quite as true for Cemetery Joe, except for towards the end of Cemetery Joe, where he kind of demonstrates his power, like by showing he can just manipulate, dead alive. It's more like playing with the unseen. It's something that he has access to. For whatever reason, that's the unexplained part where he can give and take away life, sort of that almost godlike. He just chooses to do it in the grungiest way possible by reanimating the dead and dressing them in lingerie.
Yeah, it's such a God, I love that story so much. Like that was a perfect introduction to your stuff. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit because I like coming at this at influences and the way that an imagination is shaped from different angles. You mentioned on your website and in the uh, sort of biographical section of your books that you are a metalhead,
Mhm.
uh, which I also love metal. So I feel I've been wanting to talk to authors more about this because I've had Stephen Graham Jones and Erica T. Worth on, and I know that we have similar taste in music. So what are you into? What do you listen to? Do you listen to it while writing? Do you just is
Mhm.
it in the car? How do what metal is driving you right now?
Um, yeah, I have a writing playlist. I would say it's 98% metal. So I I would say, the fallback. I love all the heavy hitters, Metallica, Pantera. I never really cared for Dave Mustaine's voice, never really got into Maiden. But I do listen to a lot of, post 2000s. Um, I would say most of the songs I listen to are like 8, 9, 10 minutes. They're a little more epics. So between the Buried and Me, um, Norma Jean, Black Braid is an indigenous black metal band that I was somehow in the top 0.5% of their listeners last year. Um, and then some more kind of symphonic metal like Draconian. I love to have something that you can tune in and out of as you're writing, but definitely like the rhythm. I would say I may have come to cosmic horror because of Metallica, because I read a term I didn't understand, and the thing that should not be in Call of Cthulhu, like what is that about? And then looking at the lyrics, looking at H.P. Lovecraft. So there definitely is, kind of a feedback loop, or it's some circular. The fact that I dabble in cosmic horror and I'm a metalhead that not grew up, came to Metallica and their appreciation for cosmic horror as well is not an accident.
Yeah, definitely. I my like horror influences in music, actually it goes further back. Like I was introduced by a friend when I was in high school to Blue Oyster Cult,
Hmm.
and they have a song called Nosferatu, which is about exactly what you think it's about.
Hmm.
So that was I'm really into Gojira right now
Hmm.
because of they were at the Olympics, and I
Hmm.
realized I didn't know a lot of their stuff, and I went and listened to their Red Rock show that
Hmm.
they did a few years back, which is a banger. Um, I hope my friend Betsy isn't listening because she's a huge Maiden fan, and loves Maiden to the point that she named her dog after a Maiden song. I was always more of a Judas Priest guy. I don't know why. It was probably my dad getting me into it, but yeah, I've never been able to write to music. I always try. Like music is a thing I use to get myself in a. It's almost like a changing my consciousness a little bit, like
Hmm.
shifting over, like, okay, time to write now. Let me listen to some music for a few minutes and get where I'm at. But I can't ever listen to it while writing because I get too caught up in the rhythm. I read once that Chuck Palahniuk used to pick one song, and that would be his one song for the novel he was writing, and he would listen to it over and over and over, which sounds like a way to drive yourself mad. It sounds like a way to get yourself to drive pencils into your ears. But apparently he listened to The Fragile by Nine Inch Nails
Hmm.
over and over and over while writing one of his books, which I love that song. I could not listen to it for the length of writing a novel.
I bet
um
you Todd Kiesling probably has as well. He's he's a,
Todd,
he's a huge Nine Inch Nails fan.
oh, you think he's listened to it for the entirety of writing a novel, or?
Probably.
Okay, Todd, I want to get you on the show because the Sundowners Dance is coming out later this year. I want to get you on the show. So if you're listening, we're going to talk about Nine Inch Nails when you're here. Gosh, I also just want to talk about Tombstone now. This is not that podcast, but I fucking love Tombstone so much. My wife makes fun of me because whenever it's on TV, I'm just like, no, we have to stop whatever we're doing because this is the part where he says, Johnny Ringo, you look like someone just walked over your grave, and I have to watch that.
It's that
Um,
one in Shawshank for me. Whenever it's on, wherever it's at, I'll just stop and watch it.
yeah, I got that one. I got Hunt for Red October is a big one, again because of my dad. And any of the Oceans movies. If
Hmm.
if the Oceans movies are on, I'm watching them. Um, any final thoughts about Event Horizon before we wrap up? Anything you
Uh,
noticed this time around that you hadn't before?
it's still a very fun movie. I think Lawrence Fishburne has the weight of the movie kind of on his shoulders. I think Sam Neill's doing Sam Neill things, and some of the other characters are maybe just less screen time. But I had a new appreciation for him after watching this. I think he adds some legitimacy to some of these scenes, which are a little bit silly at times. But I think, what my takeaway from it is, like you talked about listening to music while writing, I have short stories to very long works that are inspired from a single line from, a song that I love. So Event Horizon has been one of those movies that, although, my relationship to it has changed over time because, yeah, in retrospect, having ultra high definition of some pretty bad CGI on a large screen TV. I probably saw this originally on like a 27-inch TV on VHS from across the room. Now seeing it on a large screen and ultra high def is like, wow. It's like when you get a picture and you can see every pore on your face. But it's still the ideas. I think for its faults, which whatever, it's a fun movie. There are so many good things to kind of latch onto. So what it does well, it does so well. Like the atmosphere it sets up in the beginning when they're initially exploring the ship and they're kind of discovering some things. That is as good as any, haunted house movie that you'll ever see. and then it kind of just does its own thing for a while. And I say it's best just to go along for the ride, but then also be open to maybe some questions that might leave lingering in the back of your mind. Maybe 20 years later, you'll write a story that's somewhat connected to it.
So I have joked on this podcast, half joked on this podcast before, that one day I'm gonna write my Alien, like whatever my big like space horror story is. Do you think that that's something you have in you? Is that are you interested in that subgenre at all beyond like the cosmic influences of something like Event Horizon?
I think I might be a little bit, at least at this point, intimidated by the science of it and wanting to get that right. So it's a little bit easier to bring the Event Horizon back to Earth, where I understand a little bit better. Um, to, yeah, I don't need it to be in space to kind of have the same effect. Although to me, it is um, looking up at the night sky can be, depending on your frame of mind, a terrifying experience. We were in Big Bend National Park last year, where it has like the clearest skies in the United States, and it was shocking because I live, in a big city. So do you, to walk outside and there's so much that you don't see. So yeah, I think it's a terrifying setting. My only hang up as a writer would be needing to get some of the science right so people don't talk shit about me like 20 years later because I don't know, they read it and had time to go on whatever search engine is available at that time, kind of like I did with Event Horizon.
Well, the trick is you have to have someone who's willing to be your accomplice, and you start the stopwatch and you see how long it takes you to eviscerate and hang someone up while your accomplice runs down hallways, and then you map out how many hallways was that and how much time did it take.
I'm
And then
gonna
you
be
get
I'm gonna volunteer to run. If you want to be the eviscerator, I'll be the runner.
only if we have a consenting person who wants to know what evisceration feels like. We're all about consent and permission on this podcast. Les, it's been so much fun talking to you. Before we let you go, will you let people know where to find you online?
Not on Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. I have taken over the Sobelo TikTok, so you'll be seeing stuff coming out from me. And then I'm on Instagram. And yeah, gave up Threads as well. So Instagram and Blue Sky are kind of the big ones for me. I do a little bit on TikTok as well. And then you can find myself and LC Marino trying to sell you books on SobeloBooks.com.
All right. Our guest has been LP Hernandez. Les, this was great. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks once again to LP Hernandez for being on the show. We met in person for the first time at Ghoulish Book Fest, and within like a week, we had set up the interview for the podcast. It was so fun to get to know him and talk to him. If you have not read In the Valley of the Headless Men or No God's Only Chaos, pick either or both of them up. You will not be disappointed. Go follow LP for everything that he's doing on socials. Follow his publishing house, his new publishing house, Sobelo Books, for everything that they're doing. And be sure to follow us on our social media. We are mostly on Blue Sky at scareshapedus.bsky.social. We're also on Facebook at The Scares That Shaped Us. We are on YouTube at The Scares That Shaped Us, if that's how you prefer to get your podcast. You can also drop me a line. I am at scares@gmail.com. If you have a suggestion for the show, a question, something you'd like to hear me talk about, an author you'd like to hear me talk to, always happy to hear from y'all. That does it for me this week. I am not ready to announce the guest for next week yet. There are a couple of different interviews that are lining up, and we're going to see who gets there first, what the actual lineup is going to be. I am heading out of town again soon, so I'm trying to get a bunch of episodes in the can all at once and then line them up and get them scheduled so you can listen to them. But rest assured, we will be back Wednesday, April 9th at noon Central with an all-new episode. Check our socials to find out who the guest is. That does it for me this week. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.